Hello and welcome back. My name is Jason, and as some of you might know, along with talking about books on the internet, I also write books. These books. And obviously, as many writers on the internet will know, I often get asked about writing tips and, advice for new writers and things like that. And I absolutely want to share some of my favorite tips, but doing it on TikTok is challenging because talking about writing in under a minute is hard. So if you've seen my post before, one of the things I always talk about is outlining. Did I say outlining? Because it's important. As someone who went to school for writing, outlining has been ingrained into my existence. And no matter who you are, no matter how you choose to write, I can almost guarantee that at some point in your story, if you create an outline, your book will be better for it. So today, I thought I would take you through kind of those first steps of when I build a story, build an outline, and just kind of talk you through that process a little bit. This is going to be sort of like a little mini class on outlining, plot, and story arcs. I've never taught a class before, so good luck. I'm saying the good luck for me. Let's get started. So as a writer, you may have heard some terms like narrative arc, story arc, dramatic arc. Those are all the same thing. They're essentially a roadmap for your story. Here we have an incredibly realistic drawing of the United States. So think of your plot or your arc or your outline as a way to get from Orlando to LA. Now, if you just start driving without a map or any idea where you're going, you will get lost. And as someone who lives in Florida, you do not want to get lost in Florida. So in order to get where we want to go, we create an outline. In story terms, this means that we're not going to get lost and muddled along the way. We're going to have a really clear direction, and then we can make very important decisions about our story based on it. So outlining can really be broken down into 5 essential steps. Step number 1, the exposition. The exposition is actually one of the hardest parts to get right. Even I myself have failed multiple times at this. I can even point to published books where I feel like my exposition is kind of a mess. It's hard. That's because the exposition has to answer a lot of those important questions. You're basically setting up the story. Your exposition is giving really important details. Where does the story take place? When does the story take place? In introducing important characters. The trouble with expositions, and I am guilty of this myself, is sometimes, especially in a more complicated world or story, it's easy to get bogged down in it. It's easy to make your exposition way too long. Just try to stick to the important facts that people need to know in order to understand what's going on. Because at the end of the day, once you introduce that essential when, where, and who, you can use your who to start introducing to more aspects of the world in a really organic and natural way. No matter what kind of story you're telling, just think of your exposition as your story's way of saying, hi, hello, this is me. How are you today? Step 2 on our outline is going to be rising action. It's exactly how it sounds. This is when the story starts to amp up, and it is usually triggered by something called an inciting incident. Keep in mind, your inciting incident should come really, really early in your story. So what is an inciting incident? Well, an inciting incident is sort of the reason that your story starts. A really great example of an inciting incident is actually found in Harry Potter. Now, I know this book gets a lot of emotions going, but just stick with me just for this one example because it's a really good example. So there are a couple things that I think you can point to, but I think of the inciting incident as Harry being left at the Dursleys' house. You could also potentially think of the inciting incident as him receiving his first letter from Hogwarts. Either way, these 2 things are what set him on his journey. I like to think about the letter because if Harry never receives that letter, nothing else in the story happens. It's the moment that the action begins. Now, following that inciting incident, rising action is actually going to make up most of your book. It's the things that lead through the story. It's the moments that lead us towards the ending. And that can be a lot of things. That can be 300 or 400 pages worth of things, if not more. But all of it is going to lead us to step number 3, the climax. So the climax is usually made up of a lot of things. In this part of the story, usually a lot of the plots, subplots, characters, everything is coming together and crashing into one another. But most importantly, this is usually a point where your character has to make an important life decision which will lead to what happens at the end of the book. The climax is also the highest point of tension in your book. This is the point where things can either go really good or really bad. It is the boiling point of your book. And something else to keep in mind is the climax actually comes as a result of the character usually learning something that allows them to make the decision to get them to the end of the book. If they had had this knowledge at the beginning of the book, then you wouldn't have even needed a book. They would have just gotten there. This is that moment of personal character growth, which allows them to basically turn the point of the story into the resolution of the book. We can talk a lot about that moment later on, but just keep in mind that that climax is your highest point of tension. It's when the stakes are the absolute highest, and it's when the character has to make a decision, which leads to the ending of the book. After this point, we go into step 4, falling action. So this is when loose ends are tied up. This is when things start to kind of return to normal. We see what happened as a result of the climax of that character's decision. What is the fallout of that? This is usually not very long, and this is usually going to be in your last 30 to 50 pages of the book. And finally is the resolution. This is also known as the denouement. This is the ending, and of course it doesn't have to be a happy ending, it could be a sad ending, but the important thing is that it basically closes off the story that you began at the beginning. If you've gone to school and written a paper ever, you'll know that sometimes you write an essay which starts with a hypothesis. So your resolution should basically answer your hypothesis. This is also a great moment to say basically what your character learned from this whole experience, how they grew. This is the moment where you get to acknowledge the journey that you took your character on. So were we to map it, we would start at our exposition, then we would have our rising action and inciting incident, all the way to our climax, into our falling action and resolution. Looks something like that. So what does this mean for you in your outline? Well, what it means is you now have a roadmap. You take the ideas you have, because you probably already have an idea for a story, and you start to click them into those different places, right? I a lot of times imagine the story I want to write as like a movie trailer. So I see scenes and snippets. So when I start outlining, I take those scenes and snippets and I write them all down just in whatever order they come to me. Then I take them and I start to click them into these different parts of the story to see where they fit. Then you start to think, well, if I want this to happen, what needs to be the thing that happens to get them there? It's also important to think about your character's decisions, because you want to remember that your character's decisions and your character's personalities need to be what leads to these moments, and not just getting them there because the plot needs it to happen. And that's the thing about thinking about this from a character perspective, right? When you have that inciting incident and you know what they are going to learn at the end, you can sort of track it and say, well, would my character realistically, feasibly do this? And is this serving the purpose of what I want to get to? Again, thinking about writing an essay, when you're presenting facts, are they going to help support or refute the argument you're trying to prove at the end? And honestly, what this actually looks like is you could do it on a piece of paper like this, like just completely brainstorm. Maybe you need a bigger piece of paper and that's fine. I usually do this on a computer. So I break it down by these 5 sections and then I start to plug in bullet points of things that I want to happen in the story. Obviously, there are so many little subcategories of things we could talk about here, but I wanted to just give you at least a bare bones structure of how I go about outlining. And there's one last thing I want to mention. In the course of writing any story and outlining, you still might get to a point when you're writing the book where you say, I kind of think this might be a better idea. Think of your outline as written in pencil. Whether it's on a computer or not, you can change it. Your outline is the roadmap, but it doesn't mean it's the only direction you can take once you start writing. It's okay to realize in the course of writing a book, as I did with this one, that something doesn't work and you need to change it. You go back to your outline, you rearrange, and you use the outline to fix it. And so why is it amazing that you have an outline, but you go back and fix it? Because it's so much easier to finagle with an outline than it is to rewrite an entire book if you mess up. The outline is your path to success, and maybe your path to success changes in the course of writing a book. I can pretty much say in every single book I've written, I've had to change my outline at some point, if not multiple points, in writing the story. And that's okay. But at least when I change one point on my outline, I can easily look at the other points and make sure everything still is cohesive and makes sense. All right, guys, so that's outlining. I know there's a lot more that could be said about this subject, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet, and I hope that you learned something from this video. Obviously, this is very different from the types of videos I usually do on this channel, so let me know what you think. Is this something you'd like to see more of? Would you like more writing advice? Would you like more little mini workshops like this? I am super open to your thoughts. If you never want to see me talk about writing again, I'm also open to that, so just let me know in the comments. As always, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And of course, happy reading and writing.